The controversial sanction against Hamilton in the 2025 Mexican GP has ignited one of the strongest criticisms against the FIA in recent years and exposes a bigger problem: the systematic inconsistency in the decisions that could be defining the championship. Mexico, due to its altitude, its configuration of fast curves and violent braking, is a circuit that demands both the driver and the car. The brakes overheat easily, thermal management is a nightmare, and the asphalt has less grip than most tracks on the calendar. Everything was arranged so that technical differences and strategic decisions had critical weight. Everything pointed to a direct duel between Hamilton and Verstappen. Old acquaintances, recycled rivalry, unsolved story. And with Ferrari and Red Bull as a backdrop, the spectacle was guaranteed. But what ended up happening surpassed any previous script. Because it was not the duel that marked Sunday's narrative. It was what happened off the track, in the offices, in the stewards' headphones, in the FIA decision sheets. And there, where justice and coherence should prevail, what prevailed was chaos. A chaos that still echoes in the corridors of the paddock. The traffic lights went out, and with them the first pieces of the puzzle that would end in scandal began to be activated. From the beginning, Hamilton maintained his position at the start, defending third place with surgical precision against a Verstappen who came with his usual aggressiveness. The Dutchman, true to his style, did not take long to launch the first attack. And it was on lap 6 when the first critical episode of a sequence that would completely alter the race was unleashed. Max Verstappen, who had already shown signs of impatience when he saw that Hamilton was maintaining the pace, attempted a risky maneuver in turn 1. He launched himself along the inside, with an ambitious trajectory, bordering on the limit between brilliant and reckless. He entered at overspeed, touched the apex with minimal precision, and caused direct contact with Hamilton's SF25. The result was immediate. Both left the optimal line and were forced to cut the following curves. Verstappen took a breakaway line through turn 3, literally cutting through the grass to stay ahead. For spectators and technical analysts, the situation was clear. Verstappen had gained the position through an action that could be considered, at the very least, unsportsmanlike. In many previous scenarios, this type of maneuver has been punished with return of position or penalty. But on this occasion, the FIA determined that it was a racing incident, a label increasingly controversial due to its ambiguous nature and inconsistent application. The stewards argued that both drivers shared responsibility, that there was no additional space Hamilton could have offered, and that the contact had no immediate sporting consequences. However, the general perception was different. For many within the paddock, this was a dangerously permissive precedent. Because by not sanctioning Verstappen for cutting the track and staying ahead, a tacit message was sent. In certain contexts, the regulations become flexible, subjective, interpretable depending on the situation, the driver, or the team involved. But this was just the beginning. Just a few seconds later, in turn 4, the real breaking point occurred. Hamilton, determined to recover what he considered his, took advantage of the slipstream and the momentum generated to attack from the outside. It was a high-speed and maximum commitment maneuver, but the conditions of the circuit were not in their favor. The altitude of Mexico City, more than 2,200 meters above sea level, causes a significant loss of downforce. The asphalt was particularly dirty outside the ideal line. And it was there, in that environment hostile to grip, where Hamilton later tried to brake, keep the car on the track and regain position. He didn't make it. The SF25 blocked tires, became destabilized, and the British had to take the escape route. But what he did next would be the central argument of the sports trial. Instead of following the trajectory established by the race direction, a yellow line marked on the asphalt that forces a slower and safer rejoining, Hamilton cut directly across the grass and returned to the track just ahead of Verstappen. Although there was no physical contact or visible incidents, what he had done was, in regulatory terms, gained a position outside the track limits without giving it back. Here, the commissioners did not hesitate. They applied the standard penalty for this type of infraction: 10 seconds added to your race time. And although on paper it may seem like a logical and proportional penalty, the real debate was not in what Hamilton did, but in the direct comparison with what Verstappen did a few seconds before. Because if one cut the track and gained position without penalty, why should the other? Was there no equality of criteria? Wasn't this the same type of incident, although with reversed protagonists? The feeling at Ferrari and in much of the specialized press was that the balance was tipped unfairly. Furthermore, the punishment was not symbolic. On a circuit where overtaking is extremely difficult due to the length of the straights and the low grip in braking zones, those 10 seconds were a sentence. Hamilton went from being in podium position to being relegated to the middle group, trapped behind slower cars with little opportunity to make a comeback. The damage was done. Most frustrating of all, from Hamilton's perspective, was the technical context. The conditions were not ideal to execute that type of maneuver in turn 4. The dust, the reduced atmospheric pressure, the aggressive configuration of the car in search of top speed, everything combined to make losing control almost inevitable. But the regulations do not contemplate the technical variables in the application of sanctions, just the facts. And in this case, the fact was that Hamilton cut the track and came out in front. But what really ignited the controversy was the difference in treatment. The perception that, once again, the FIA did not apply the regulations fairly, but rather with a dangerous ambiguity that fueled distrust among the teams and fans. When the penalty was confirmed, the atmosphere inside the Ferrari pit changed completely. What had been a promising classification and an exciting start to the race was now transformed into a scene of frustration and resignation. And then the inevitable happened. Lewis Hamilton's visceral reaction, an unfiltered emotional release that not only portrayed his state of mind at that moment, but also uncovered a structural crack in the sport. That's this T, man. The grip there is so low. The grip there is so low. The words filtered through the team radio with a mixture of helplessness and anger. It wasn't a superficial complaint. It was an emotional confession from the epicenter of a pilot who felt betrayed. Not for his car, not for his team, but for the system itself to which he has dedicated more than a decade of his life. This was not the first time that Hamilton was critical of referee decisions, but it was one of the most forceful. Because it was not a fight for the championship, nor a direct battle against Verstappen. It was something deeper. What was at stake here was confidence in the fairness of the rules, the belief that all drivers, regardless of the badge on their chest or the history that precedes them, are judged by the same criteria. What hurt Hamilton the most, and this was revealed in his subsequent statements, was the lack of fairness. He was not as bothered by the fact of being penalized as by the fact that he was the only one to receive that punishment, even though others also benefited from similar situations. It was a blow to his integrity as a competitor, to his notion of what a fair sport should be. In his post-race interviews, whether in front of the television microphones or in the corral with the press, Hamilton was relentless. He openly questioned the credibility of the commissioners, the consistency in the application of the regulation, and the lack of transparency in the decision-making processes. "What are we doing here?" he said with a mixture of irony and sadness. "Is this really Formula One? Is this really the level of refereeing we want for our sport?" These statements did not fall on deaf ears. They generated immediate reactions in the paddock. Some drivers showed implicit solidarity, avoiding directly confronting the FIA but hinting at their discomfort with certain decisions. Others, more cautious, preferred not to get involved publicly. But what could not be avoided was the discussion. In the media and forums on social networks, the controversy was already viral. Hamilton's sanction was not simply a one-off decision. It was rather the catalyst for a debate that has been brewing in silence for years. Is the decision-making structure in Formula One broken? Can a system that seeks to govern a sport with millimetric precision allow for such openly disparate criteria? Formula One, by nature, is a sport where differences are measured in thousands, where a split-second decision can define the success or failure of an entire weekend. And yet, what we saw at the Mexican Grand Prix was not a time difference. It was a difference in interpretation. Two similar maneuvers, two pilots involved, but two completely different responses from the commissioners. The question that now floats in the air is inevitable. Why? Why Hamilton yes and Verstappen no? What is the logic behind applying a rule with surgical rigor in one case, but letting another pass without consequences? Does the name of the driver, the team he represents, the context of the championship, or the media pressures of the moment influence? The case of Mexico exposed that crack. An incident that should have been managed with transparency and uniform criteria ended up being treated with disparity in judgment, depending on the protagonist. What happened at the Mexican Grand Prix cannot and should not remain a simple anecdote. It was a warning. A clear sign that even in the most technological and precise sport in the world, subjectivity and inconsistency continue to have a disproportionate weight in the results. Hamilton's penalty opened a deep wound in the credibility of the system, one that will not heal with official statements or uncomfortable silences alone. Do you think the FIA acted fairly in sanctioning Hamilton? Or do you consider, like many, that we are facing a new example of favoritism and inconsistency? What would you change in the sanction system to make it clearer, fairer, more transparent? Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.